let go of your ABCs, your assumptions, biases, and certainty. But, we all have these assumptions that we make about everything in life, really, and some of that is helpful shortcuts, mental shortcuts, but some of that is really problematic. We have these assumptions and we need to be mindful and aware of the assumptions that we're making about not just others, but about ourselves, How many times have we as creative people been like, I can't do that, or I'm not good enough for that, or I can't speak on that stage yet, or I can't do this project as well as that. These are all assumptions. We don't know that. They're stories in our head.
Scott, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Thanks. I'm super excited.
Curiosity is something that you care a lot about, but I'm hoping that you can, in your own words, start off our show today with a little bit of a backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. So my mom named me Scott Keone Shigeoka. It's kind of like the best way to understand me. Scott's sort of my American side. Keone, I'm from Hawaii, so born and raised. So that represents that side of me. And then Shigeoka, which basically means the mountains that disappear into the distance. That's my Japanese side. And my dad told me this story where like 12 generations ago, there were like these star-crossed lovers in my lineage. This princess samurai descent like literally lived in a castle, and then this farmer guy who was really looked down upon in a different social class, and you never cross that, especially back in the day in Japan. But they fell in love and they were like, we are going to defy the expectations of society, and we're going to do this. We're going to run off and we're going to create our family. And that's my ancestors. They saw past what was happening in their families and their societies. Who were telling them, don't do this, don't disappoint us, don't go across this social class, stay with the people who are in your bubble, who are in this castle. And they fell in love and they made a family. And if it wasn't for them doing that, I would not be alive. And so, this idea of, in all of my work, I think it's guided by what was in my ancestry, this idea of, can we really pursue love? Can we have open-heartedness towards people who exist outside of our castles, who come from a very different, set of life experiences, who come from, a different background from us? Can we turn towards them? Can we open our hearts, even if the people around us are saying, don't do that? Like I don't want you to talk to them. I don't want you to talk to the enemy, So that's like the big part of my sort of exploration and curiosity is how can we use this as a heart-centered tool to connect with people meaningfully, even those that are very different from us. Yeah.
Well, obviously the listeners or watchers, however they're consuming the show right now, they can immediately go to the rationale for having you on the show, right? We're in unprecedented times.
Yeah.
It feels different to be alive than it felt to me 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And, there are tools out there whose original intent was to connect us. And now we find them sort of dividing us just based on the way the technology works. And for those that might not understand that, that's specifically talking about social sites whose job it is to create engagement. And we know that negative sentiment connects or engages people more than positive sentiment because of our negativity bias that are hardwired into us. So to say that we're more disconnected now than ever before is probably true, at least for recent history.
Right.
So if you had to write this book, I mean, as an author myself, I know how long it takes to write a book. What was the original impetus for the book around our connection? And just to be clear, I want to go to the book is called Seek, How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. And so the question I want to sort of launch into is, does this divided world and our hunger and biological need for connection, was that the rationale? Or was it something around your genuine curiosity and all of the different value forms that curiosity can provide for us?
Yep.
Which of those two, or was it some other third that I haven't named, were the primary influences for your work and specifically around this most recent book?
Yeah, I think the big thing was I like many of the listeners here, we lived through, at least in the United States, we lived through the 2016 presidential elections. And that was just a really big moment where I personally saw so much hate, vitriol, othering, just people literally screaming at each other, at different meetings, town hall meetings, at family dinners. On social media, people were just like blocking people that like friends and family. I was blocked by like people who I have long histories with because of my progressive beliefs, and they have differing views. And so it was just, I think a lot of people felt that, and I remember reading this stat that said it was a Reuters Ipsos stat, and it said 1 in 6 people ended some kind of relationship because of what they perceived as irreconcilable differences after the 2016 elections. I mean, that is just 1 in 6, just like snip, snip, cutting a relationship. That's wild to think about. And, and then I started like peeling back, and I was like, this is not just about politics. I mean, that's the easy gateway in, but then you start looking at faith, you look at geopolitical conflicts, you look at, race, the generational divide. Okay, boomer. I mean, there's just, you can't like throw a pebble and not see it and not feel it. It's like toxic air that you're breathing. So that's what pushed me, to explore this topic. And so I basically was in this cushy job in San Francisco, progressive enclave. And I was like, if I want to understand how to, bridge our differences and actually, really understand how we can heal as a country, I need to go out there and actually do it myself. Like, I can't be preaching without doing that work myself. So I like quit my cushy job, got my Prius, like 10-year-old Prius, super California cliche, like went to Home Depot with a friend, took out the back seats, like, got a bed, got a Planet Fitness membership. And I just like started going off across the country. And, what could I learn if I went to a Trump rally? Like, what could I learn if I stepped into a church again as a queer person? What could I learn, if I went to, an indigenous reservation or a convent with nuns? Like, what could I learn from all of these different spaces? And so I went there and was invited in often, or sometimes I just showed up and learned a lot about curiosity in the process and about connection. But I think I think they're both sort of key to my exploration. Yeah.
This idea of curiosity as the foundation to your work and the book most recently here, it strikes me that curiosity is something that is probably embedded deeply in our DNA because we need to be aware. This is hardwired into us. We're looking for, saber-toothed tigers on the horizon. So we have to investigate, what is that shadow? What is that, that noise in the bushes there? If you think of, primeval humans around the campfire.
That's right.
And yet when what is that concept, the study that they did on the brain, where we would rather take a negative known future rather than a potentially positive unknown, because
like
our bodies exactly. So how do we reconcile the sort of this the difficult nature of curiosity, right? On one hand, it's such a powerful attribute, as you've written in your book. And again, we'll get into some of the details now. You've got a very practical framework, which for creative people is very, very valuable. One of the reasons, again, I wanted you on the show. But how do we reconcile this conundrum that is our curiosity? Because on one hand, we're wired against it. On the other hand, it's all the best stuff is on the other side of things we don't know. And yet we're hardwired to not go there. So, I mean, here you are. What motivated you to get in your car? Seemingly against your biology.
Totally.
And, all these beautiful things that you found, like, how do we reconcile those things? That seems so different.
Absolutely. I mean, fear of the unknown, just fear in general is such a stumbling block for curiosity. But, it's also important to know, yes, we are born with curiosity. It comes from exactly what you're saying, from our ancestors. But we also know that we release dopamine, which is the happy hormone, when we are curious. So it's the same thing that happens when we're having sex and we're having like a really awesome sex, like, or what happens when we eat something really, really delicious. Like, you go out to eat and you're like, oh my God, this is so bomb. I love this. You're releasing that happy hormone. And the same thing happens when you're curious. And we can all think back to it. Like, imagine if you're listening, any of the listeners, what's one time you were super curious about something and you went out and you explored it and you learned about it and you were just, you're getting out there. Maybe you were like really curious about surfing, and you wanted to, try it out, and you got the board and you went out there and you're in the water thrashing about. You're like, okay, how could I like stand up on this board? Like, how do I like paddle in a different way? So that process of getting curious about something is, I say curiosity is pleasure. So that is the way that we get motivated, right? And that was like a mantra for me as I like went out. I was like, this is going to be scary. I do have a lot of fear. Similar to my ancestry, I had people all around me that were saying, bring a gun, bring a knife, bring pepper spray to these places. And I was like, whoa, like that, I mean, that's the state of our world right now, that we feel like we have to arm ourselves when we meet people who look different from us or who are from rural parts of our country or who vote in different ways. And that's just not where we should be. And, I think knowing that curiosity is pleasure, and then knowing also that curiosity can unwind that fear and that anxiety. So, I did a lot of work before I went on the journey around death. I created this immersive theater experience in San Francisco where you would actually die in the experience, and end of life doulas. It's basically like a birth doula, but they operate on the other side of life. They help you to die. They're trained, real legit, like they've helped people to die. They were the folks in the show that guided you and 9 others. You couldn't go in the experience with anyone that you knew. And because you die alone, you die on your own terms. And these, musicians and actors would come up to you and you would experience your death. And then you would look back at your life. You would look back at your life and you would, think about, how would you live differently if you're given a second chance? That was the name of the theater piece, Second Chance. And what I learned working in the death with, those who, work with those who die. And I also interviewed folks who are end of life doulas, and they're in my book, is that that's one of the biggest fears that people have. Like, biggest anxiety is like, death is like, so the biggest unknown. We're talking about being afraid of the unknown. Like, it's like, I don't know. I mean, like you can have, faith, but it's also like, wow, I don't know. It's, there's always for a lot of us like that fear that comes up, primal fear about death. And, paradoxically, what folks who work in palliative care, what end of life doulas have learned, and what people who are dying who have this end of life anxiety have learned is that when you're curious about the life you've lived, about the people you've met on your journey, about how you want to die, about, what's the legacy you're leaving for the next generation, your end of life anxiety actually reduces. It gets less and less and less. You are able to, by getting curious about something that you're fearful of, you're able to reduce the fear and reduce the anxiety. And there's also research to back this up too. So I also knew in the back of my head that, yes, I'm scared, but if I'm curious towards this thing that I'm afraid of, I know that it's going to lower that anxiety and lower that sense of fear. And you can apply it to anything you're afraid of or anything you're anxious about. People use this a lot of time in the clinical setting, for instance. Like if you have fear, of spiders, right? You work your way up by getting curious about it. You look at a photo of a spider and then you look at it in a box, and then eventually you're just like, I mean, I can't imagine this, but you're like playing with it in your hand, So, not to traumatize anyone that like hates spiders who's listening in. Hopefully you don't like drive your car into like the shoreline or something like that. Yeah, I really hope you don't. But it's that it's the same sort of premise. You're getting curious about the things you're fearful of, and by continued exposure and contact, you're like, they're not so bad, those Trump voters, or like, they're not so bad, those Christians, and then you start to nuance them and you're like, no 2 Trump voters are the same. No 2 people that are 52 are the same. We're all very nuanced, unique people. So So curiosity is pleasure. And
the connection, I think that's a really useful way into this material. The relationship between fear and curiosity, that curiosity has sort of I would say it's sort of like it attaches to it in a way that is extremely useful. This is one of the things that I want to specifically talk about for our audience today, is the utility of curiosity. It is
Yep.
actually a very valuable, and it's a skill that we can develop over time. You've got a matrix, a way of helping us think about it. And, I wrote at length about how creativity is, it's a process, not a product. If you can start to just look at that and invoke this in your everyday life, you get better at it through repetition, like most things. And so why don't you give us the framework that you've got in your book? I think it's incredibly useful. It's very easy to remember.
Yep.
And this is, one of the things that I did when I first got exposed to your work is started putting this into action. And, the dive, what's that called when you get a word that's...
Oh, the acronym. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Acronym. Yeah. There you go. You got, this acronym is really useful. I'm wondering if you could walk us through it.
Oh, I love that you use it. I feel that's so amazing. And I'm curious to hear about, what you did to sort of exercise this muscle of curiosity for you.
Sure.
I think I think what's helpful to start with too is, obviously you and I both share a love for the ocean. And I like to use that as a metaphor for curiosity. Curiosity is a desire to know things or to understand, and it exists on a spectrum. So just like the ocean, there's the shallow curiosity, right? That's about getting information about the tree in your backyard, or, what's your name? It's Chase. Oh, Scott. Okay. Where do you live? Seattle. Cool. I live in the Bay, so it gives you some details about a person or about something that you're getting curious about. But then as you move along the spectrum of curiosity, on the other end is deep curiosity. And that's, what allows you to sort of go beneath the surface, to see some of the richer stories and the insights. Instead of asking a question like, what's your name? You might ask, what's the story of your name? Sort of how I started this episode, right? Like, and I'm curious about the story of your name too. Like, what is the story of your name? And it gives you a lot more sort of insight on who you are, where you come from, who named you, your relationship to them. Just asking that one question, like, what's the story of your name? So deep curiosity dives beneath the surface, and that's sort of what my book is about and my exploration is about. So DIVE is the acronym, and that is, I just like you, I'm a big creative person, and I know that I need that structure. Just like if I'm going to lift weights and get more muscle on my body, which I've been trying to do, you need that structure, you need that set of exercises. So I wanted to provide that. And so I did that in the book. So DIVE is the acronym, DIVE. And each is a core muscle for deep curiosity. So D is to detach, which is to, let go of your ABCs, your assumptions, biases, and certainty. So, and you talked about this in your micro episode, we all have these assumptions that we make about everything in life, really, and some of that is helpful shortcuts, mental shortcuts, but some of that is really problematic, right? When we see someone, and we assume that we know everything about them, or we hear their political party or their faith tradition, and we think that we know everything about them, right? We need to, have a practice, under detach that's called back that ass up. And this ass being short for assumption, because we have these assumptions, and we need to be mindful and aware of the assumptions that we're making about not just others, but about ourselves. How many times have we as creative people been like, I can't do that, or I'm not good enough for that, or I can't speak on that stage yet, or I can't do this project as well as that these are all assumptions. We don't know that. They're stories in our head. So, the idea of detach is we have to really let go of these assumptions. And also, we have to let go of our control for certain and desire for certainty. You know what I mean? You mentioned, failing and embracing that is a great way to do it. I also think becoming an admitter is another great way to do that. Admitting when you're wrong, admitting when you don't know something. We live in a culture that valorizes like knowingness and having the answers. But actually, the research shows when you have this intellectual humility, when you have curiosity, you're way more liked. And you're also, it has no effect on your competency and the ways that people view you as competent. And that's a big fear people have. It's like, oh, if I say I don't know something, people are going to think like I'm dumb, or like I'm not competent enough. But that's just not true. It doesn't happen. So that's D, detach. How do you let go of your assumptions, your biases, and certainty? I is intend. And that's about how do you create the mindset and the setting for curiosity. So very inspired by those who have sat with psychedelics or have done psychedelic assisted therapy, you often think about, what's the mindset I have going in, and then what's the setting we're actually going to be in for that experience, that journey, right? Because they both really affect, how that journey unfolds. And the same is true for our curiosity. If you're in a crowded, loud subway station, a little bit harder maybe to access curiosity with another person versus if you're in like a nice, cozy, safe, neutral space where people feel like they can really share, vulnerably. So that setting, physical setting really matters. So if you're going to have a tough convo with your teenager or your partner, your romantic partner, really thinking about what's that space where we can get the most curious. And then your mindset, is really important too. And I talk about how sports psychologists do this, right? You have mental rehearsal before you get out there and do big wave surfing, before you get out there and like, get on the basketball court. You imagine yourself, succeeding at, free throws or succeeding at catching that wave. And that actually is, shown to help that mental rehearsal in your performance. And the same is true for curiosity. You can actually think about, okay, what's the way I'm going to show up into that conversation? What are the questions I'm going to ask? What's my demeanor going to be? Am I going to be like smiling while I'm talking and received in a way that's like open, or, and how do I end that conversation? So that's really, really help that I intend is all about mindset and setting. V is value, which is to see the dignity of the person that you're being curious with, and that includes yourself. And we live in this time of mass dehumanization. I mean today, as we're having this conversation, I was just on social media and I have friends that are just like, they're trashing each other publicly, privately, because of the suffering and the pain that they feel around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But there's dehumanization that's also going on, and people are just casting groups of people on either side. I'm seeing this unfold on social media, and saying that Israelis or Palestinians, deserve death. It's wild. That's not true. Like that no human should ever say that about a group of people. Like, we were talking about, innocent kids, and, and we're talking about, families and stuff like that. So it's, we have to start from this basic fundamental agreement that we have to humanize every person. It doesn't matter where you live, what religion you practice, what age you are. I value you and your humanity. When we start from there, curiosity is so much more accessible, because as soon as we say no, like, you're the other, you're the enemy, like, we don't want to get curious about that person in the
Right.
Trump rally, or that person that has a different opinion than us, on a conflict that may or may not even involve us directly, in terms of our families being there or not. And then the last piece is E, which is embrace. So that's to really welcome the hard moments in our lives, and that's when curiosity is most necessary. So I talked about that with death, but it also happens with happier things like marriage and having kids. Like, staying curious
Yeah.
is so important for you to maintain that connection and to really continually understand yourself and others. And you know this as well too. You've talked about this on the show, that when your partner comes in the door, and if you're 10 years, 15 years in, and I hope to have a long and robust relationship, like you with my partner, we have to continually be curious about them, to
Yeah.
continually be curious about our children. We have to continually be curious about the team member we've worked with for 5 years, because we're constantly growing. And so, even in these like hard charged moments of conflict and tension, or in sort of difficult moments where, we're being tested, curiosity can serve us, and really help us. So that's sort of the idea of DIVE, detach, intend, value, embrace. And there's all these practices in the book too on how you can exercise those muscles. So
Yeah. I would like to, just for purposes of our conversation, share the way that I
yeah, I would love.
bumped into each of these. So when I was attempting to practice this framework, I found it very useful, and it got me there very quickly.
Yeah.
There was not a lot of beating around the bush when you know, whether this is in traffic or I I tend to step in it, if you will, is around certainty. I have a lot of certainty, especially if I am an expert in something or I perceive myself to have been doing this for, 20 years or having built all these businesses. It's easy for me to say, oh, this is how you do it. And I realized in reading your book and thinking a lot about it, how much of life that sort of steals from me, that takes away from me by my belief that I know something. And as I've mentioned before, in other shows, and we were sort of hinting at when we were talking before starting to record today's episode, like there is some utility, right? Because if you were like wildly curious about every single thing on the planet, it'd be very hard to make your bed in the morning.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Oh, wow, look at these sheets. You can get lost. But I was just quickly made aware that, wow, my certainty, and it underpins as bias or, all these sort of assumptions that we make. And it was easy for me to write them off as useful because it's how we get through our day. But at some fundamental level, there was a sadness in me when I immediately paid attention to the D and how certain I am about, even something as simple as traffic, like, oh, when the person does this, they're going to make a right turn. And until they don't. Right. And when they don't, our mind, this is the reason that our mind sees things that don't actually happen. We report crimes and we can't even describe the perpetrator because we have a bunch of assumptions built in. And the mind plays tricks on us. How many of you who are listening or watching right now have you think you see someone walking toward you in the shadow with a dog, and then you get up close and it was just a plant that was next to them as you were approaching, and it's not a big scary dog or whatever the thing is. Like our mind is consistently filling in the blanks. And what I had a sadness of realizing that, oh my gosh, certainty is actually keeping me from a lot of the most beautiful and open ways that we can be in this world. So that was, to me, that was beautiful. Something that I noticed as valuable. With intend, I'm a huge mindset guy. And, I think your mindset determines a lot of your experience in life, because that is literally, that is our direct relationship with it, is through what we think and what we feel.
It's the engine,
and, Yeah. And the simple intent to decide before that you're going to go into something with, open mind, head, heart, is radically transformative. And especially I was able to connect that with E, with the embrace part. So I'll talk about V in just a second here, but sort of preparing your mindset, to me, allowed me to embrace the hard stuff. If you can look at, as I'll just give you a quick example. My wife, it was her birthday last weekend. We had a great time. We stayed up a little bit too late. We went a little bit too hard. We had a lot of fun with our friends, but she wakes up this morning and she's sick. And I'm like, God, what a bummer. Now I got double duty. I got to get down to the podcast. I got to walk the dog and got to get her some medicine. And these are small things. And I was like, you know what? This is actually an amazing opportunity for me to make her feel really cared for. And it was just a simple intention. And I was aware of all of the stories that I had about how bad and how like how inconvenient. This is small bad, right? This is B with a small bad with a small b. And then so that's sort of like D, I, and E. This particular the value thing. It seemed like all the others filtered into value when I'm aware that I can't possibly be as certain as I walk through life, when I decide that I want to have an open mind, when I am saying that these, the obstacle is the way, to quote my friend Ryan Holiday, around embracing hard times. If I'm doing all of those other things, the V takes care of itself. Then
that's right.
You see other people as people. And it just, this was it was a profound lesson in humility to embrace your system. So
beautiful.
Again,
thank you for sharing that.
I didn't, and I don't I don't want to hijack the show, but I want to try and help people understand how like simple frameworks like yours
Yep.
can be practiced in a moment
Yep.
and can provide value forever.
Yep. Yep.
So here's my follow-up question. I believe that the way that these social media tools, for example,
Yep.
our kids are consuming them, I think it's going to get more difficult before it gets easier, just based on the algorithm and how much time people are spending in front of their devices. So is it your belief that by using this sort of curiosity manifesto
I
that
love
we
that.
can overcome these hurdles that are before us?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, and we have no other choice, and it is our most potent tool,
Yeah.
for, not just creativity, not just solving problems, but also for us to move forward in our lives. I think that, you know, I can't imagine a society anymore that's functioning that where we're continuing to turn against one another or away from each other, where we're just canceling and blocking people left and right. That if that 1 in 6 turns into 3 in 6 or 4 in 6 people ending a relationship, I mean, we will not be connected at all to one another, and we'll be in our own
Mhm.
bubbles. We'll be disconnected from other viewpoints, and that's not a beautiful or enriching world. It makes me sad as well. But B,
Yeah.
you can't actually understand and empathize with people who are living in different, life experiences than you, and you can't solve collective problems that we're all facing, right? So, you know,
Mm.
yeah, we have to be curious, and we have to. It is the most important thing that we need to do right now, because when you look at the world, it's collapsing. And if you have rosy colored, I mean, I am the rosiest colored glasses, or whatever you say for that saying. Like, I am so hyper optimistic about everything. It's actually something I've had to work on in therapy. It's like, to welcome in the negativity, and to see the negative emotions, and to not disassociate by just being positive all the time. And when I started to do that, I realized, holy shit, like, our world is collapsing, y'all. Like, we're not in good shape. And there is a lot of good and beauty in the world, and we don't often see that represented in the news. That is very true. And there's heightened wars and conflict. We're going through a mega climate crisis right now, where you know which is creating climate refugees, and people are moving into that's basically what happened with Syria. And we're moving into this new paradigm where different kinds of people are going to be continuing to be in our community, and we're at a crossroads. We can decide to be incurious and say, you're not welcome here. I don't want to understand you. You're different from me. You come from a different place. You vote in a different way. That's one road we can choose. Or there's this other path where we can actually be curious, and we can turn
Mhm.
towards people, and we can, remember that it's this pleasurable connective experience, and we can ask people about their life experiences and break bread with them, and, form more interesting dinner tables that have like lots of rich stories and experiences, and people are, I mean, that's like what we love about our work, right? Is we get to meet
Yeah.
and encounter such incredibly different people who just like blow our minds and hearts with the lives they've
Yeah.
lived. And, I think that, I'm pushing, I'm rooting for us to pick that pathway, um, because I really don't see another option. I really don't
Mm.
see us, devolving into a world where we're not choosing to be curious. I mean, that scares
Yeah.
me. That world scares me. Yeah. Yeah.
This I'm gonna share a quote and get your reflections on it. It's a quote from a dear friend of mine, Brene Brown,
Yeah.
and she uses this concept of it's very difficult to hate from up close.
Mm. I love that. Yeah.
And to me, it's a very powerful way of thinking and seeing the world. And you know, this sort of harkens to your road trip, actually getting in your car and driving. What was it, 45,000 miles
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
year or something like that?
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it feels impractical to ask everybody to get in their car and drive
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
45,000
Yeah. Yeah.
miles
Yeah.
and do their own research project.
Yeah.
But if you look through the lens that I just shared that quote with Brene. And you had to probably employ this.
Yeah.
You had to get close
Yeah.
to people who were different from you
Yeah.
on your journey. So
Yeah.
what are some sort of lightweight, daily, practical things that people can, they could, how can they change their mindset to actually desire to be curious about someone who is different from them? What did you do when you were on your
Yeah.
trip?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it, did you ground it in courage or just the intention? Like, what are some simple ways that people ought to think, or that you would recommend they think, because to get close to someone, even when it's difficult?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to remember is that there's multiple directions to curiosity: the inward, the outward, and the beyond. So inward
Mm.
curiosity is, how do I get curious about myself? My own stories, my histories. That's what you do in like talk therapy, for instance. You like really get curious about your emotions, yourself, your stories. Then there's outward curiosity. How do I get curious about, you as a person, other people around me, society? And then there's the beyond, which is getting curious about anything that's not in the physical realm. That could be God for some of us, the divine, but it could also be like ancestry or 7 generations from now. So I always like to tell people to start from the inward. Before you go out and you're like trying to like practice this curiosity muscle on that family member that voted in a different way from you, or from that neighbor that you have that like conflict with, just like you would in a weight room, right? You start small, start with those small reps that are a little bit closer to home, and direct your curiosity inward and strengthen the muscle that way. So things that you can do, you can, you know develop a powerful question list. What are the questions that you've been asked, from to explore yourself and your own life and your stories, that were really profound, that really made you think, that questions that made you think of stories that you had forgotten, or that made you feel deeply. And those are potentially stories that you could also ask other people, that might unlock the same thing for them. There's a practice in the book that I have around quicksanding, which is this idea that we can just, when you find yourself in quicksand, you shouldn't like flail and freak out. That actually sinks you in further and faster. So the same is true in life, that when we're very overwhelmed and there's a lot going on and we have a lot of responsibilities, and oh no, our partner just got sick, and how do we to take a moment for ourselves, to 5 to 10 minutes, to just like take a walk, a slow, get into your body, to have slow intentional movement, because that's actually what helps you to sort of drop back into your body, get curious about what you see on your walk, the people that you're experiencing. Just like let your mind wander, let your mind experience a sense of awe. And that is something that requires no one else. You don't have to go and be in a conversation
Yeah.
with anyone. You can just go for a 10-minute walk. And the research shows that when you do that, it actually allows you to enter into that state of curiosity, which you can then bring into other aspects of your life. So if you're feeling a little stuck, just like go out and take a walk, and like just be really curious about what you encounter in 10 minutes.
Mm.
But then when you start to feel ready, okay, I'm ready to bring this out. I've explored different books, and I've read news articles from the other side, and I've taken my all walk, and I've wrote down some questions that are really key for me. You can start to practice it in other people, but don't immediately go to like the highest
Mm.
conflict person. Like don't go
Yeah.
to that person that you're really like struggling to connect with, or having some fights with, or that your sibling that you always have political blowouts with. Maybe start a little bit closer to home. And then what happens is you start to ask your romantic partner or your children questions, and you see the pleasure it's giving you and them, and they're asking you questions, and that gives you more courage, and it gives you more competency around curiosity, to then apply it in these harder situations that are a little bit stickier and have more conflict.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Helpful. One of the things that I was struck by in your work is curiosity has, for me, often mostly meant an intellectual activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has meant and I can tend to fall into the trap, as I found myself doing when you were describing that, like thinking about like what's the right question, what's the how would you phrase that? And
Yep.
who's the first person that I would turn to? And one of the things that struck me in the book is this sort of heart-centered,
Mm.
a softness that was present in all of it, which to me, that feels more like the curiosity that I feel when I'm sort of in a creative mindset. Like,
Mm.
let's see where this goes. And it's a
Yeah.
thread that you're willing to pull on sort of without expectations
Totally.
versus some sort of an intellect versus intellectual activity. I'm
Yep.
wondering if you can, because we're going to have all sorts of, different listeners and people of sort of who are going to take this in differently. Talk about the sort of the intellectual pursuit
Yep.
of curiosity versus the heart-centered approach.
Yeah, and they're both really valid, right? We use curiosity as this intellectual tool to, extract knowledge and information, right? So, you might learn
Mhm.
about a different topic. You might explore, different, you might collect information about people who you know. And that's really, it's an important tool. It's not just like helpful for, pub trivia on like the weekends. It's also helpful, for you to understand the world and have information and knowledge, to, be set up to navigate, your life and your life in the world. But,
Yeah.
I think we miss out on curiosity as this force for connection, as this tool to actually, bring us closer to ourselves, to each other, and to the divine. For that's what I wanted to call attention on. It's not just, what's the what plant is that's in that nursery. I like want to learn more information about that, and I go on a Wikipedia rabbit hole. I mean, that's fun and great, do that. But how do you also, like you said, have that tenderness in your heart, that childlike, wonder when you're like getting to know another person, and you're meeting them for the first time, or you're meeting them for the 10th year, like, and you share the same house. How do you come in from that sort of, with that compassion and that open-heartedness to, want to understand them? And it's very playful. I think you're right, like connecting creativity and curiosity. It should feel really like engaging and fun and optimistic and mischievous at times and playful. And that's what the true heart of heart-based curiosity is about, right? It's not like I'm trying to like figure this thing out. Like feels very like, you know, it's very sort of a like focused energy, and it's very sort of fierce energy, when I think about curiosity in the mind. But in the heart, it's very tender, and it's very, like you said, soft, and it's compassionate.
Mhm.
And some people might be afraid of those words. Like that might not be like something,
Yeah.
tenderness, softness, ugh, like I don't want that. But I
Yeah.
think that it opens up so much for you in your life. I think it's that heart-centered curiosity that gives us, the life satisfaction, the fulfilling relationships, the understanding of ourselves and the world around us in a more spiritual and a more soulful way. um
Mhm.
and yeah, and we know too from the research that when you practice, curiosity daily, you actually extend years on your life, right? You are less likely to die, or you decrease your mortality when you have more curiosity. And so I think a part of that is because, and we see this with older adults too. I mean, just even in your own lives, like the minute you become incurious, I mean, that's like the downfall, for people. I mean,
Yeah.
you have no reason to live anymore. It's like, I'm not curious about the world. I'm not constantly challenging myself to grow and to, stay connected to the people around me. So what's the point in living, right? So I think, you know, that heart-centered, curiosity is like the end. It's a literal engine for our life. And I think it's a really beautiful and sort of wondrous sort of experience.
Mm. I had a mentor
Yeah.
once, and I guess I can say I still have this person as a mentor. And he's wildly curious.
Yeah.
And I found myself being so inspired by his curiosity.
Yeah.
It was genuinely like, wow, that is like, there's something infectious about
Mm,
this openness
mm,
that I feel like to me, like one of the things as a leader, specifically in a business environment, but just generally, cynicism, like I don't have any patience for it. I'm like, if you're on my leadership team, you cannot possibly be a cynic and sit in on the leadership team with me. That's just not a trait. There's, intellectually rigorous. That's fine. But you can't be the other way.
Yeah.
So, but if I'm thinking about through the lens of my mentor or a mentor that has been really helpful for me, it was infectious. I would call it contagious.
Yeah.
So was my experience with this curiosity of this person as I experienced it as very contagious, and I walked away feeling like I could be a better person if I sort of had that level of curiosity, and then I would carry it forward for the rest of let's just say the day.
Totally.
What is it about curiosity that is contagious? And is this a thing that you saw in your research, or is this just me? Talk to me about the relationship there.
No, that's totally real. I mean, we have, mirror neurons, and also there's this phenomenon called the chameleon effect, which is essentially, the idea is that we're the product of the people that we are closest to or that we interact with on the daily. We start to pick up language or mannerisms, accents, ways of thinking from the people that are closest to us. And that can be bad, but it could also be really great, especially when it comes to like your mentor who's super curious. And, we know from the research that curiosity is contagious, that when you practice this as a parent, your children are more likely to be curious because you're modeling it for them. If you're an educator or if you're a business leader, you practicing and modeling curiosity is going to inspire a culture of curiosity in your classroom or in your workplace. And so, I think, yes, like you want to think about who are those curious ambassadors, those people around you who are just like, you're like, wow, like they really inspire me. Like they like constantly are opening up to the world, to new experiences. I feel like every time I hang out with them, like they're talking to different people and we're having really interesting conversations. And, they're, they don't have that sense of certainty, maybe, if like that's the thing that you're struggling with. I think finding those folks who are very, very curious is very helpful, and you start to take on those practices, and you get inspired by that. I think when you travel, that's like a great example too, right? Like when I first went on my first trip, abroad, I remember meeting all of these folks who had traveled the world and had done really interesting. They sailed and they, were photographers like you, and they had all these stories, and they were just like this insatiable thirst for adventure and for experiencing things. And I remember being like this 18-year-old who had never really done that before and being like, oh my God, this is like the coolest thing I've ever heard of. Like I want to experience more. And, as I talked to them at hostels and over drinks, I just, my mind, you just like filled with excitement about what was possible, for my life and for my future. And had I not opened that first door, to actually do the scary thing and, leave the islands and travel and experience something new, right? I never would have, I wouldn't be where I am today looking back and being like, holy shit, like all the relationships and experiences and the places that I've been to. I'm so fortunate for that. And it was definitely inspired by the people who are around me for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
What is it's my understanding that there is a relationship in business between curiosity and innovation. I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Yeah. So we know that when you have a more curious culture in a workplace, creativity levels skyrocket, essentially. They increase. And so, if you are looking for a more creative workforce, you want your team to, think more creatively about different problems that you're facing or about, products you're creating, then you want to instill a sense of curiosity in them. And it makes sense because if they're curious about the world, they're looking at different, parts of the world, different cultures, like different businesses, they're looking at how people are interacting with the world, through observation, through exploration. It makes sense that you have all these new ideas and new connection points to pull from that you can then take into your work, right? And that makes you a stronger, more creative, person, individual in the world. And so there's definitely a link between those two. And I would say, like, if you probably have seen it too, where
Mm,
when you've been really curious about, in your life and in your work, either as a photographer or in your business, um, you were probably experiencing heightened creativity. I mean, I don't know. Does that
for
feel
sure.
true for
No,
you? Yeah.
yeah, and this is sort of like what I'm trying to make here and asking the question is this, you cite some studies in the book, which I found really valuable because we understand it intellectually. Like I can tell you that, oh, curiosity and creativity are closely tied.
Yeah.
But when you're actually living it, and here's just a really simple example
Yeah.
that I will give is when the kind of photography that I did is largely location based. So you have
Hmm.
to go somewhere. You have to go out into the woods or go to the location, and
Yeah.
that is the place where you take pictures. And if the weather is anything but 100% predictable in that you look on the radar and it's just blue skies as far as you can go, if there's a
Yeah.
hint of uncertainty or
Yeah.
there's a hint of, oh gosh, it looks like we might get some weather at this time, or what's the
Yeah.
weather? Is it wind? Is it like, well, that the simple decision to go
Yeah.
and see for yourself versus stay in the hotel,
Yeah.
assume that you know what it's going to be like, and say, we're going to just, sit this one out and wait for the next sunny day
Yep.
or the sunny window later on.
Yep.
Most of my best pictures came from the process of going, of
Yep.
curiosity, of deciding to go there
Yep.
and say, wow, well, we had, the weather was never going to be an element in this particular shot for this ad
Yep.
campaign or whatever.
Yep.
And now I'm here and it's absolutely striking. You could not predict that the sun was going to go through the clouds in that filtered way that made these badass God rays coming out. And
Yeah. Totally.
like, and, if by extension, that sort of the curiosity or the willingness to go and be uncertain
Yep.
produced the most interesting and what I will use the word innovative
Yep.
pictures.
Yep.
It was very easy for me to see how that same sort of framework could be really vital as a business leader.
Yep.
So I can
Yep.
see it really
Yeah.
clearly in creativity. Like
Yeah. I
you
also think.
go because you don't go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, like, it made me think about, like, how, when folks saw how children were so terrified going into MRI machines, their curiosity led them to, like, where are they not terrified? What are they excited about? It's like Disneyland, it's like amusement park. So they started to paint, these beautiful, like landscapes and adventure, space, themes and pirate themes, like on the MRI machines in children's hospitals, and trained the technicians, in the same way that you might train someone, in like Disneyland, you know what I mean? To like help them to, feel, to stay still, but to see it as an adventure, that it's like a ride, and that would only be possible if someone had been curious and asked themselves, like, okay, well, clearly kids are not enjoying this experience of getting in this large, scary machine. Like, what's something that's large and scary in a machine that they love to jump into, right? It's like rides and roller coasters and theme parks. And so curiosity also brings you into these really sort of interesting places. And I think you need to, as a business leader, sort of stretch your sort of viewpoint. It's like, if you're thinking about
Mhm.
efficiency, who are some of the most efficient people in the world? It's like a race car pit driving crew. You know what I mean? They can like change a tire in 3 seconds. Like, I've not met a Jiffy Lube person that can do that yet. You know what I mean? Like, no offense to Jiffy Lube. Like, I don't know why I named them or called them out, but it's like, wow, I want to understand, why does that happen? How are they able to change a car tire so damn quick? Well, they've got roles, they're coordinated, they have communication, they train their one repetitive task over and over again, so they can like basically do it with their eyes closed, and what can we learn from that in our own businesses if we're trying to, increase speed? Not that speed is always, sometimes efficiency can be harmful and dangerous, but if it is a positive sort of endeavor for your business, where are the places that you can get curious about, where folks can do things quickly and efficiently and well, and what can we learn from that? I mean, I run this artist residency in Iceland, and this woman who Japanese, amazing Japanese American artist, Yoko. she was very curious when she was laying in a hospital bed, and she's a musician, and she was hearing all the sounds from all the alarms in the hospital. And she's a musician, so she knew like this one chord was a death chord, the devil's chord. It was just like this hard to hear, just very just like sonically discombobulating setting. And if anyone's been in a hospital for a long period of time, like, these alarms go off, it like heightens your like, blood pressure, you're like scared, you don't know what's happening. And so she, has done this exploration, at like Kaiser and in different hospitals, getting curious about, what's the new sonic landscape that we can have in a hospital that's actually conducive to healing, that's actually conducive for our patients and their families, right? And so that's the kind of curiosity in business that I get really excited about. I mean, it's people who see a different way, almost in like two disparate worlds, like Disneyland and a hospital, and can somehow like
Totally.
combine those two things and create something new and interesting. Yeah.
That is a proven formula for some of the most creative thinking in the world. Truly,
Yeah.
like to take a thing
Yeah.
that is assumed to be true and ask what if it wasn't true, or what is a different way of doing it? Like literally focusing on the thing that everyone takes for granted.
Yep.
Now, you don't want to, reinvent the wheel, so to speak,
Yep.
but surprisingly, there is a lot of insight. A particular designer named Stefan Sagmeister, when he's challenged to design, I forget the name of this principle, but when he's challenged to design something, he tends to look at it through the lens of what would it look like if we designed this running shoe through the ideas of a recycled plastic bottle. It all of a sudden, there's all of these frameworks that melt away the things that you assumed had to be true. And now it's just, and you can literally combine, any two things. So that was that's just a framework, what Sagmeister did. And it's referencing a thing that I can't remember right now. So forgive me, those know-it-alls out there on the internet. You can send me a note via social media and let me know what I'm missing. But to me, this idea of looking at areas that are assumed that the de facto, and I love the lens that you just put on that with the hospital, like all these noises. Turns out noises matter, right? And if you want to make someone feel comfortable and at ease and have a healing mindset rather than then you certainly don't want to.
Totally.
That's
oh God,
who does that help?
No, yeah.
So I love the just being open, and I specifically see that as it's easy to see through the lens of as an artist, but I want to sort of speak to the business people out there and people who are entrepreneurs. Like, what aspects of your business, your life, your processes can you look at under a slightly different microscope and come up with even if you challenged yourself to I just found like that's where so much of the best stuff in life is. It's on the other side of the things that you think
Totally.
Now,
There's these scripts,
I want to wrap up.
Go
ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead. Talk about the scripts. No.
Yeah, the last thing I was just going to say on this point is like there's these incuriosity scripts, that we have in business. It's like this is the way it's always been done, like that. And really, what that is it's again the certainty and the lack of curiosity. So we have to change those scripts, and maybe there could be a different way. How could we explore that? Like all of what we're talking about is driven by curiosity and questioning and exploring. And so I just wanted to like put a pin on that.
That's a great
have awareness when you're being curious as a leader. That's like a great place to start too.
A reasonable way for us to wrap up our conversation today is around what are the limits of curiosity. You have an entire chapter dedicated to it in the book. And I found it, as someone who's written on creativity, I'm always about, there is no limit to our creativity. And so I found it like when I was looking at the table of contents, I immediately flipped right to that chapter. And I'm wondering if you could just address that. Like, what are the limits?
Yeah, totally. And that's so important. I mean, it's about limits and boundaries, that chapter. And it's the idea that, obviously we want to be curious and we know that it is contagious, but sometimes we can be so curious about someone else consistently over years and they are never returning that curiosity back to us, no matter how hard we try. And in fact, that relationship might turn out to be harmful in some way, right? And I talk about a mother-daughter where the daughter is experiencing that with her mother. She always feels like she's being curious and compassionate towards her mom, is understanding where she's coming from, is engaged in her life, but it's never returned. Like it is never given back to her, no matter how many times she's named it and asked for it. And so, with the help of her therapist and her partner, she realized she, needed to create space and distance and put up a boundary with her mother. And I think that's important because curiosity is sometimes seen as like this kumbaya, like let's just go and all have tea and like it's all going to work out. But you have to know where your own boundaries are with curiosity. I was at a show with my then boyfriend, and it was like the Avett Brothers, which is like a super peace and love kind of like show. But we were basically verbally, and threatened by a group of guys who were super drunk and intoxicated. But anytime we were like holding hands or kissing, they were like, "You better knock that shit out." Like you don't, like basically saying that they were going to hurt us if like we kept on doing that. And like everyone else around us was doing it. They was just like we were the only queer couple close to them. So we ended up, I could have been like, "Hey guys, like let me be curious. Like what's going on for you? Like what's but that's not that, my physical safety was, and my then partners was in jeopardy. We felt. So we moved. We exited that situation. Like this isn't the time or the moment for us to get curious right now. And there's a lot of folks who have trauma. It's like it's or are in really scary depths of society. I talk about Daryl Davis and I talk about Niobe Way. These are two individuals who are curiosity ambassadors. Daryl Davis is a Black man who basically uses curiosity to connect with people who are white supremacists, who are members of the KKK, and he's derobed many of these individuals by forming connections. Niobe Way is a foremost expert on boyhood and reads school shooting, manifestos and tries to understand like what drives people to do this. But, if not everyone can do that. Not everyone, that is beyond the limits of a lot of people, and you might directly be impacted, right? Like you might be a victim or a family member of someone who is impacted by a school shooter. So to do that kind of curiosity exploration, even though it's so important because we have to understand the root cause and why is this happening so that it never happens again, that is just not possible for some people. So that's what that chapter is about, is like, you got to know your boundaries, you got to know your limits, and that sometimes, your curiosity is earned. It's not deserved, right? You can't just expect that people are going to be forced to answer your questions. And even in some cases, it's illegal to be curious. If you're a hiring manager, you can't ask certain questions to someone that you're trying to employ. You're not deserving of that curiosity. So to remember consent, that, just because you're being curious about someone's culture or about, the way that they live through the world, it doesn't mean that you deserve an answer. Like they have to feel ready, to give that answer to you. And you also better be down to dish too. Don't ask a question you're not willing to share too, because that question might come right back to you. So that's what the limits and the boundaries of curiosity, that chapter is all about.
Yeah, it felt as soon as I got there and read the chapter, I realized like, this is actually a really interesting way to think about, the boundaries, because it's really not, it's not bounding curiosity, it's bounding the, the ability to understand that we're not all at the same place. And the trauma lens, I think there's a psychologist, Kevin Becker, in there, talked about how trauma actually can impede our ability to be deeply curious, and how you're like, oh yeah, you got to take care of that part of your life prior to being curious. It was just really helpful. And first of all, I want to thank you. Obviously,
thank you.
This is it's a massive superpower. The ability to be curious, to it's directly correlated and connected to our creativity, which I'm a huge creativity advocate. So your work on curiosity was really, really helpful, heartfelt, connective, and really valuable to me. And I would say the same to anyone who's listening, if creativity is an important part of your life, and I think that's probably a precursor for people in the show here, please pick up a copy, Seek How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. Scott, where can we point people other than the book?
Yeah.
Congratulations. Anywhere else you would direct our attention besides the book?
Yeah. And then first of all, I would just want to say thank you. And, I had fear coming into this conversation, not because I'm afraid of you, but just like, you have a big platform and like, it was scary. And I had to practice what I wrote about. I had to be like, I had to dive, to get into this conversation. And even during our conversation, there were moments where I was getting incurious and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not saying the right things. Or like, I don't know if this is like, it makes any sense. And I had to stay open and remind myself, I had to say, stay curious, Scott. Like there could be someone out there that needs exactly this one message that you're putting out to the world, and you're just being your genuine self. So, I think curiosity even serves me. I wrote the book and I'm still like constantly using it all the time. But anyway, to answer your question, you can reach out to me on social, on Instagram, on my websites, at Scott Shigeoka, scottshigeoka.com. I actually do respond to DMs. Like I love hearing from people, and especially if you've read the book and you have thoughts on it or how you've applied it to, your own life. Like nothing gives me more joy than to have those kinds of conversations. So please reach out. And thank you again so much for this time and your generosity of spirit, your curiosity. I feel very supported and held, and I'm excited to hear what people think of the episode. Yeah.
Well, this again, my pursuit of the show and sharing what I'm learning it started out as very, I've always been a curious person, and I realized that I could take this little guilty pleasure of all the research and reading that I was doing and turn it inside out and make a show, 14 years ago. So you're seeing sort of the world is seeing my curiosity almost in real time. There's a little bit of delay between when we record the show and publish it, but people are getting to see the books that I read and the people that I'm, tracking and watching what they do. And in tracking and watching your career, just want to say thanks for doing the work. And I also, you've got some stuff you've taught at the UTA, University of Texas at Austin.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating. Yeah. What's that about? Just, is it possible to take classes?
Yeah. I mean, so I taught 2 classes. One was on creativity as a tool for healing. So we would do these class projects. We created like zines that we printed and delivered out in Austin, like a deck of cards of healing practices. That's like a really fun class that's, connected to the Center for Integrated Design. And then I teach a Power of Curiosity class. So it's like taking the book and just like deep diving. Like we're going into yourself, we're going out to the world, we're going to like check out the divine. And like, it's so fun. These classes are, I'm really excited because higher education usually divides people, like undergraduates here, graduates here, and like executive education here. And I think that's so problematic. Like we need to all be mixed up together. We learn the most when we're integrated like that. So that's what my classes were, we had 18-year-olds with like 60-year-olds, who had like decades of experience, and they were all just like talking about healing and talking about curiosity and exploring that and going out into nature and going out into the community. And it's fun. I love teaching so much. And it's a big joy of mine for sure. And I was just realizing you're now the mentor that you were talking about to so many other people who are listening and who are around you, because you're the curious person, and people are sort of getting that contagious, infectious energy from you to hopefully get curious in their lives. So it's a really cool sort of meta moment too. But
well, thank you for pointing that meta moment out that I have missed. Grateful for your time and energy today. Thank you so much. And again, so much. For those of you out there in the world, seek how curiosity can transform your life and change the world. Scott, until next time, thank you so much for being on the show. And from both of us, we bid you all out there in the internet universe, bid you a great day.